What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through some of the top trade targets for the fantasy football playoffs. So these are guys that I think have league-winning schedules, where if you're in a good position, you have a solid spot in the current rankings, you think you're kind of a lock for the playoffs, or you're pretty close to a lock. These are players you could bring onto your team, and these could really be the hammers that help you win that fantasy football championship. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. Going to be talking about a few different players at a few different positions today, but let's start off with the running back position, and I want to talk about the Buccaneers running backs. So these guys don't necessarily have a great matchup for the first week of the fantasy football playoffs. If it's like an 8-team or a 6-team playoff, Week 15, these guys are not great, but if you're just going semifinal, final, maybe you have a first round bye, these are guys who have an elite matchup in both Week 16 and Week 17. You can see Week 15 going up against the Chargers, not great. They're allowing the third fewest points per game to the running back spot. But if you can get to that Week 16, Week 17 area, I think both these dudes can absolute smash, two top 5 matchups in those 2 weeks. Now, I did actually want to talk just a little bit, about these two running backs. And these are their numbers when they have played together ever since like Bucky Irving really broke into like a pretty close 50-50 split here. So you can see their numbers weeks 4 through 10. I took out the 1 week where Rachaad White missed, and Bucky Irving had a solid game because not a good sample of them playing together. But we have 6 games here. You can see Bucky Irving with the slight lead in terms of the attempts per game. Rachaad White has a very similar lead in terms of targets per game. Rachaad White slightly edging him out in the yardage department. I guess the biggest kind of factor here would just be 5 touchdowns to 3. In a 6-game sample size, that is somewhat significant. You have Rachaad White averaging 16.1 PPR points per game and Bucky Irving at 12.4. Now, I feel like you look at that difference and you think that like Rachaad White is the significantly better option, and maybe he should be viewed as the slightly better play. Personally, I feel like they're very, very close. I feel like the touchdowns are kind of just coming down to luck. It's like who's getting in on their red zone look, who's getting in on their goal line opportunity. Like we see here, the usage is pretty similar. Both guys are mixing in near the goal line. So I do think they're pretty close here. I think both of them are solid trade targets. And when we're getting into like that nice schedule, Week 16, Week 17, they're both probably going to be playable in like that RB2 range just based on the matchup. Also, they have like this unique skill set where both guys are solid pass catchers. They can get it on the ground, also through the air. So 2 interesting guys to look at, especially like they're not going to have to break the bank to bring in a Rachaad White or a Bucky Irving. Then we have Chuba Hubbard here, and he's actually, I think, a really interesting example of someone who probably should be a sell candidate for teams trying to make that playoff push, but is a really, really strong buy for people who don't really care about the next few weeks, because he just has, like fantasy-wise, a brutal next 4 weeks. Week 11, he has the bye, which obviously he's not going to be doing anything for you. Then he draws the Chiefs, the Bucs, and the Eagles. Now, the Bucs matchup, actually pretty solid, nothing crazy, but the Chiefs and the Eagles have actually allowed the fewest and second fewest points per game to the running back spot. So you're getting pretty much the 2 toughest matchups in the NFL and a bye week in 3 of the next 4. That is not great for someone who's on the playoff bubble. So maybe they want to move off of him, bring in someone who has a better schedule for that stretch. But I think for, teams that can kind of punt those weeks or they don't really care, they're kind of locked into the playoffs, Chuba Hubbard could end up being a league winner for them in the playoffs. You can see here Week 15, going up against the Cowboys, they've allowed the 5th most points per game to the running back position. The Cardinals in Week 8, the 8th most points. And then they finish it up with the Buccaneers, who have allowed the 6th most points. So I think someone who you could have a win-win trade on both sides where the one team needs to get off of him because they need that playoff push. The team that's already set, they have a top seed. They're willing to bring him in because they can suffer a few bad weeks or him just not playing altogether with the bye because they're going to get that boost when the fantasy football playoffs come. Now, moving into the wide receiver spot, I have to say, I think there are 3 teams, or I guess just 3 wide receiver rooms that have really nice playoff matchups. But I wouldn't say there's an extreme amount of fantasy relevant guys within those rooms. We're going to start off with the Giants wide receivers. I mean, really specifically here, Malik Nabers, and then I guess Wan'Dale Robinson in a deeper league. If you're in a 10, 12 team league, I'm not trying to buy Wan'Dale Robinson here for the playoffs, because if you have a solid spot, a solid roster, a solid record, he wouldn't be cracking it anyway. So Malik Nabers here in your typical league is definitely more of the target. So you can see Week 15, fantastic matchup Ravens, they have allowed the most points per game to the wide receiver position. Then you have the Falcons, who have allowed the 7th most. And then you have the Colts, who have allowed the 12th most. So, 3+ matchups. I'd say like one just elite matchup here against the Ravens. And I do kind of want to talk about Malik Nabers here because early on in the season, even with bad quarterback play on a not so great offense, Malik Nabers, was pretty much like top 2 wide receiver through the first 4 weeks. I think it was him, only behind Nico Collins. And we can see the splits before and after his concussion. Now, I don't think this is like a concussion issue on why he's not playing well. I think he's probably just come down to earth a little bit based on the offensive environment he's in. But you can see here, weeks 1 through 4, the dude is averaging 13 targets per game, 8.8 receptions, nearly 100 total yards, and then he scored 3 touchdowns in those first 4 weeks, averaging close to 23 PPR points per game. Since then, he's pretty much seen a hit in every single area, 10.5 targets per game, 6.5 receptions, 55 yards per game, and then he has not gotten into the end zone a single time from week 7 through 10, which is obviously going to be a pretty significant hit to that point per game number where he is down at 12. Now, I do think this is a spot where the Giants might be making a quarterback trade coming out of the bye. Brian Daboll did not commit to Daniel Jones in his most recent presser. Jones has looked rough. You have Drew Lock sitting there. I think Drew Lock potentially taking over after the bye week could give a spark to Malik Nabers. Now, do I think he's going to bounce back to his first 4 weeks in terms of production? No, I don't. I think his rest of season production is probably somewhere pretty close to in between this 23 and 12 point per game number. I don't think he's going to go the rest of the season without getting into the end zone. So if someone's panicking, right, they need those wins. They're on the bubble. Malik Nabers isn't getting it done. He's on the bye week, so they can't even play him this week. I would definitely be willing to buy low on him. I think he can go on a nice run once we are getting into those fantasy playoffs based on the favorable matchups. Then the other wide receiver room I'm looking at here, the Packers wide receivers. So this is pretty much Jayden Reed, maybe Romeo Doubs also if you want to throw him in here. But you can see 3 top 10 matchups in the fantasy football playoffs. Week 15, the Seahawks, 9th most points per game. The Saints, 10th most. And that's with them having Lattimore for, a chunk of the season. So would expect them to kind of fall off in that department. And then the Vikings, a top 3 matchup for opposing wide receivers. And like I said, I want to talk about Reed specifically here. And I want to talk about his splits with Jordan Love healthy, playing the full game, and without either him leaving early with injury or, him just not getting the start altogether. Because there seems like, at least with what I've seen in my comments, that people seem to be somewhat low on Jayden Reed. Not sure why. Not that they completely dislike him, but some of the comments I get of oh, I think this player should be higher than Jayden Reed, or my rest of season rankings, these guys should be right next to each other. And a lot of the times I don't get it. And I think the disconnect is coming from people just looking at his overall production, just his straight up point per game number, and not looking at the splits with Love in and out of the lineup. Because for a lot of these wide receivers, if the quarterback's healthy for the whole season, I don't think you can fairly compare them to someone who has not had their quarterback healthy for the total season. You can't throw out, who's an example? All right, Nico Collins, right? He was balling out early on. Are we going to pretend like that production would have been the same if it was Davis Mills in there? Because I don't think it would have. So looking here at Jayden Reed's splits, you can see with Jordan Love healthy, 6 games, the opportunities, 7 per game, nothing crazy, but he's a touchdown threat. He's super efficient. 93.3 yards per game, 4 total touchdowns in those 6, averaging 18 PPR points per game. Now, without Jordan Love, smaller sample size, 3 games, believe these were 2 Malik Willis starts, and then another game where Malik Willis came in, played a decent chunk because Jordan Love had to leave. Opportunities take a hit, 5.3. I think most notably, just the efficiency and the touchdowns take a massive hit, 57 yards per game, 0 touchdowns, all the way down at 8.3 points per game. Now, on 7 opportunities per game, I'm not necessarily expecting Reed to continue to give you 18 plus points per game, but even if he's slipping to that 17, 16, 15, with those favorable matchups, I do think he could be backloading those points rest of season. And this is coming from someone who really was not all that high on Jayden Reed heading into the season. And the argument that I had was pretty much he was overly efficient last year. He got into the end zone, had great touchdown luck. I wasn't sure if that would carry over into this season. In hindsight, I probably should have just bought into a young player balling out because he's pretty much repeated it this year. It's not like he has the best route participation. It's not like he's commanding an insane amount of targets, but he's getting a lot of valuable looks. He's making plays when he does get those opportunities. And with a favorable playoff schedule, I do think he could be a really nice option for you. And then the final wide receiver room here, this is gross. I'm not necessarily like advocating for you guys to go out there and trade for a Bears wide receiver because they've all pretty much tanked over the last 3 weeks. But we do have the Bears here, and they have a really strong fantasy schedule. It seems like a lot of the time you get these like prime schedules and it's like almost unusable. We'll kind of see that at the quarterback position up next. But for the Bears here, they have 2 top 3 matchups going up against the Vikings and the Lions, and then a top 10 matchup going up against the Seahawks. And the one thing I will throw out there is that if you have a guy like DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, I'm really not interested in Keenan Allen at this point. If you have like Rome Odunze or DJ Moore, and they're on a team that needs those wins, they're not in a good spot, I don't see how those teams are starting DJ Moore or Rome Odunze with any confidence. And so if you can give them like a depth piece off of your bench, could be like some random like flex-worthy wide receiver, somewhere in like the wide receiver 40 range, but that could be someone that they actually want to play in their lineups, especially if they have injuries, bye weeks, and you could get a DJ Moore or a Rome Odunze in return, right? You're not giving up a lot. You're giving up just like one random kind of trash piece on your bench, but if you can get one of those guys, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you have a shakeup at offensive coordinator. Maybe that creates some spark here. We know DJ Moore is a talented wide receiver. Rome Odunze was a talented prospect. Maybe one or both of these guys kind of figure something out. Caleb starts to play better. They support him a little bit more. And just maybe one of those guys has a nice finish to the season and is able to capitalize on this, schedule. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying it's like an over 50% chance that it does happen. But if you can give up like a very limited piece, someone who's probably never going to crack your lineup for a known talent in DJ Moore or Rome Odunze, who could have like a later season rookie breakout, it's something I would look into. Because if you do have a team that's like pretty much 500, not in a good spot, like what are they doing having DJ Moore, just sit on their bench rest of season? Now, moving over to the quarterback position, this is kind of what I hinted at here. I think the best fantasy playoff schedules are the Panthers, the Titans, and the Giants, which is Bryce Young, Will Levis, and then Daniel Jones / Drew Lock. Do I want to go out? Like if I'm in a good position, I have a playoff spot, I don't want to start Bryce Young, Will Levis, or Daniel Jones / Drew Lock in my quarterback spot. Like it's just not going to happen unless your quarterback position has somehow just been abysmal and you've like overcorrected everywhere else. Like those are not guys I actually want to be starting, even in good matchups. So I did find one guy. It's actually kind of similar to the Bucs running backs. It's Baker Mayfield here. He does not have a good matchup in week 15, but if you're sitting pretty here, you have the first, second pick, you look like you're going to get a first round bye, or it's only 4 teams make the playoffs. Week 16, week 17, he has great back-to-back matchups. The Cowboys have allowed the 4th most points per game to the quarterback spot. The Panthers have allowed the 6th most. So, 2 really strong spots there. And then you look at Baker at this point, he's very likely going to have Mike Evans back. K. Dotton is kind of broken out. Now, I'm not sure if people are going to be willing to like sell low or, not even low, just sell Baker Mayfield at this point. Because even with the injuries around him, some tough matchups, he has still been productive. But I do think he's someone who could have a really, really strong finish. If you are in the market for a quarterback, maybe they don't want to deal with the bye week, potential Mike Evans injury return. So could be someone to look into here because week 16, week 17, he really could be a hammer at the quarterback spot. But that is going to wrap it up for some of the top trade targets here. Let me know your thoughts. Any questions, drop them down below. If you want to run any trades by me, I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.